All right, so I'm going to walk you through a bit of the program. A program fit for academia is what we're calling it today. We're going to hear tales from the trenches. We have some alumni in the crowd, and so my colleague Kutlu, who's in the audience, is going to do a panel with 3 alumni companies from the CDL. And then, as Christine said, we finish with networking. So the best place to start at understanding the Creative Destruction Lab and why we exist is to transport yourself into space and look down on Earth, and then start mapping the distribution of 2 really interesting data sets. The first is capital available to early stage ventures. So if you maintain this vantage point, map the distribution, you would see this enormous spike over Northern California. And you would see a series of smaller bumps elsewhere in the world, but nothing would compare to the size of what's in the valley. If you maintain the same vantage point and instead mapped the global distribution of scientific breakthroughs, the distribution would look a lot more even. It would be a series of smaller bumps. Not one bump would really dwarf the others. And this is especially true if you control for population. And at the CDL, we say that this yields a puzzle. If you believe that scientific breakthroughs are a catalyst for entrepreneurship, why is there such a striking imbalance between these 2 distributions? Well, there are 3, put another way, why is it so much harder to build startups outside of Silicon Valley? There are a lot of popular theses out there to explain this discrepancy, why it is so much more difficult to build outside the Valley. But we don't find any of the theses all that compelling or comprehensive. So at the CDL, we say the primary cause for poor performance in translating regional scientific excellence into entrepreneurship is not one of the following 3 things. So I'm sure many of you have heard of the ideas thesis. This thesis is pretty simple. It says the people in Northern California have better ideas than other ecosystems. And we know that that is empirically not true. There's the effort thesis. I suspect many have heard of this one too. It says that there is a mindset in Northern California that's not easily replicable. They have real hustle, real ambition. And as a Canadian, coming from relatively quiet, polite Canada, this thesis does resonate a little, but we don't think it's the full explanation. I think we can all think of, and maybe you yourself are one of these people, a really talented researcher with really interesting technology, and you have a lot of hustle and ambition. Those examples are not hard to find at the University of Toronto, Oxford. We were just at a conference in Leeds, engaging with a lot of interesting researchers from the university there. So we're not convinced it's the effort thesis. There's also the capital thesis. This one also has a bit of merit. It says because of the Valley's historical first mover advantage in fostering startups that this enormous amount of capital that they have amassed has given them an advantage that will never be matched. And the thesis goes on to say that the people who manage and deploy this enormous concentration don't like driving more than 2 to 3 hours to their nearest investment. And there's a bit of merit to this. There's been some interesting research that finds that if you set up direct flights between the Valley and an ecosystem, that you will observe a increase in entrepreneurial activity, investing in early stage ventures. But we don't find this entirely convincing either. I can speak to the Canadian example more than the British or other modern economies who have used the innovation toolkit, policy toolkit that is, to foster entrepreneurship. Governments across the world have made capital to early stage ventures very cheap, either through tax credits or just dumping enormous sums of money into ecosystems. And sure, they can point to more companies getting funded, more companies getting incorporated, but there aren't a lot of, as far as we can tell, there is no compelling example right now of an ecosystem that has employed those policy tools that is yielding the creation of massively scalable companies. So if it's not all of this, what is the explanation? So at the CDL, we say the primary reason it's harder to build a startup outside the Valley is a failure in the market for entrepreneurial judgment. Now, I know that's like a buzzword-packed statement, so I'm going to unpack it a little. Entrepreneurial judgment. At the Creative Destruction Lab, we define that as being able to take a priority list of, say, 100 things you could be doing on your startup and being able to take a handful of those, let's say 3, and focus on those exclusively in the short term because those are the most important things you should be focused on in order to increase the probability that what you're working on will actually be financeable, actually be profitable months or a year or so down the road. Where do we find that type of entrepreneurial judgment? Well, this is an interesting question because what we have observed in running the CDL since 2012 and opening up CDLs in other cities outside of where it was founded in Toronto is that there are a lot of people who believe they are excellent providers of entrepreneurial judgment, that they can coach founders. People such as, well, at the CDL, we don't believe it is people like business school professors. We don't believe it's government employees working in innovation departments. They do great work, but the type of entrepreneurial judgment we're trying to find and deliver to startups, in our view, can't readily be found there. People who run accelerators and incubators, so full disclosure, I'm not a serial entrepreneur. Myself and the other staff at the CDL aren't the people who are going to be coaching ventures. We are very good at running this program and putting ventures in touch with people who have this sort of judgment. And who are they? Very simply, people who've done it before. So people who had some really interesting technology, they developed it into a prototype, they raised a seed, they started generating they started taking that prototype towards a more well-defined product. They started generating some revenues around that product. They eventually scaled the operation, became profitable. Maybe they raised they went through a more mature level of financing, like a Series A or more. And ultimately, they realized the underlying value of the asset through some liquidity event, like an acquisition or an IPO. So people that have gone this entire journey, in our view, are excellent providers of entrepreneurial judgment, which, as I said, we define as being able to take a 100 priority list and shrink it down to a handful. A failure in the market. We were founded by an economist, hence all of the econ jargon. We think this is a market failure because these people who have great entrepreneurial judgment, who've been significant operators of large technology companies, who have founded, scaled, and exited massive tech companies, you can find them in ecosystems all over the world. The only difference between ecosystems like London and Toronto, the difference between them and the Valley is that the concentration of these people is a lot greater in the Valley. They are harder to find in places like London, Paris, New York, Toronto, etc. They're hard to find, they're hard to get meetings with, they're hard to meet with regularly, and it's hard to use their time well. So how does the CDL fix this problem? We build the market for judgment, and we deliver it through 5 objective setting sessions. So here is a selection of mentors at the Oxford sites. The Creative Destruction Lab has 6 sites, 5 in North America. We just opened Oxford. Someone like Patrick Pichette, the former CFO of Google, have been an operator of a massive tech company. The entrepreneurial judgment and the ability for him to coach ventures on what to prioritize is fantastic. Someone like Jane Whalerudd, one of the most prolific angel investors and advisors in Scandinavia. Someone like Siobhan Zillis, who oversees huge swaths of Tesla, is kind of the right-hand person of Elon Musk right now. These people, significant operators, founders, exits, they are providers of excellent entrepreneurial judgment. So we've got the market. How does the CDL facilitate ventures interacting? We do that through 5 sessions. Sessions are day-long objective setting meetings spread over 9 months. Each is approximately 8 weeks apart. So you don't really have to pay attention to these first 2 dates. We have an application open right now. It closes August 12th. And then during the first 2 weeks of September, my colleagues and I will be interviewing companies, shortlisted applicants for our first cohort. So the sessions, these are the Oxford dates. These aren't the Toronto or Montreal dates. We have other sites. None of our dates overlap so that people in this market that we have built can mentor and invest at more than one site. But as I said, what you are going to see on session day is the CDL facilitating the meeting of these 2 sides of the marketplace. And we do that through 2 primary ways. One, they're what we call small group meetings. So a company admitted to the program is going to come into session number 1. So at Oxford, it's November 15th. In the morning, they're going to have small group meetings. They are going to meet, we're going to have about 6 to 8 of these. And these are, on the left are company founders. This is in Toronto. On the right are 2 of the mentors in Toronto. Just to give you a sense of the type of profile, the type of people that we put in the market for entrepreneurial judgment. Michael Serbinas, serial entrepreneur. One of his recent exits was his e-reader being acquired by a Japanese conglomerate for $330 million, I believe. Dan DeBow had a recent acquisition. Well, I guess it wasn't that recent, probably, I think that was 5 years ago. He's now a full-time angel. Through Salesforce, the amount wasn't disclosed, but it was a decent acquisition. So they are providing entrepreneurial judgment. They are telling the founders, if I were CEO of your business, these are the 3 things I would prioritize in the short term. In the short term, in CDL, in the world of CDL, is 8 weeks. So you're meeting with the mentors. They're saying, if I were CEO of this business, these are the 3 things I would sprint towards. You can think of the gaps between sessions as software sprints. And so the founders are going to get a lot of advice. A good chunk of it will overlap, but it is a diverse marketplace. They're going to receive competing kinds of advice. So they'll have about 6 or 8 of these meetings, a lot to chew on after the morning. We break for lunch, and then in the afternoon, we completely change the format of sessions. The large group discussion. So we do this because at this point, the company is only met with a fraction of the marketplace of entrepreneurial judgment. As I said, they've received a lot of competing advice. We want to go through a peer review process of that advice. So very concretely, the way it works, by the way, this might look like demo day, like a demo day or a pitching session. There's no such thing at the CDL. We don't do pitching. Instead, we encourage the founders to actually speak as little as possible, because what they're about to receive is a fire hose of excellent advice for their company. You can think of the advice that they're going to get as rocket fuel for the company. And as I said, the way it concretely works is someone on the team is going to ask a mentor who's met with this company. Let's say it's Barney Pell. Barney Pell led a team of 80 at NASA. He was the first person to deploy AI-enabled robotics in deep space. He is now the co-founder of Moon Express, which is a very interesting space company, full-time active angel. So the moderator, that is one of the staff persons, is going to say, Barney, introduce us to the founders. Tell us who they are, what are they working on, what excites you, what worries you, and what 3 things do you think they should be focused on? Then the moderator is going to deliberately find a critic in the audience, and thus ensues a peer review process of the short-term objectives the company has been given. Just to give you a further sense of the types, I think it's really important that people here understand the profile of the typical CDL mentor, because we're very focused on, as I said, we have a very specific definition of what good entrepreneurial judgment is, and we also have a very good sense of where to find it. So someone like William Tunstall-Padot, left-hand side front row, some of you may know him. He is a Cambridge-based computer scientist, very active at the Toronto site. He's also going to be mentoring in Oxford. William founded Evie, which was acquired in 2012 by Amazon, and it's now what powers Amazon's Alexa, which I believe is still the #1 selling AI-enabled consumer product, definitely in North America, and I think still globally. Someone like Anousheh Ansari. Anousheh was the world's first female private space explorer. She taught herself Russian, enrolled in the Russian space program on her own dime. She, prior to her adventures in space, was a very successful telecom executive and founder. On her own dime, went up in a Russian rocket to the International Space Station, and now still a serial entrepreneur. She's director of many companies. She's also chair of the board of the X Prize, which I think many of you will know is that very famous annual competition trying to foster entrepreneurship in space. to take advantage of the recent drop in the cost of getting into low Earth orbit. Been a ton of activity in that space, pun intended. So, as I said, in this room, peer-reviewed advice is happening. Some other interesting things are happening in this dynamic. Organic investments. The Creative Destruction Lab does not guarantee funding to the companies admitted to the program. We don't have our own fund. We don't invest. This is a good time to tell you that the CDL does not take equity in the companies it admits, and we do not charge them a fee. So there is no automatic investment. However, this marketplace that we have built is filled with a lot of what we call check writers, people who are active investors. And there's a really interesting quality about how investment happens at the CDL that I think makes it especially unique. And it was articulated by a visitor that we had from Harvard Business School. Her name is Rebecca Henderson. She was sitting at the back of one of these rooms, and she was seeing all the activity, all the advice. She was seeing the staff saying, okay, company XYZ is fundraising. Does anyone want to take a meeting? And so we're taking notes of all the hands that are going up. And she's seeing all of this activity. And she said, it's really interesting. For an organization that doesn't guarantee funding, there's an awful lot of fundraising. And not only that, you seem to have really revolutionized the early stage financing model. And the way she said it is, you've changed the model from investing in pictures to investing in movies. Or put another way that will probably resonate with this audience, which I think is quite technical or technically oriented, from investing in cross-sectional data to time series data. The company is meeting with mentors over time and hitting milestones, thus creating data points for the mentors and investors to make informed decisions about whether or not they want to work with you, whether or not they want to invest in you, as opposed to the traditional model of reaching out to an investor and then using data from a single point in time, giving them data from a single point in time, in order to make a decision about whether or not to take a meeting with you, whether or not to discuss their level of interest in your open round. There's also triage. So the CDL runs a competitive application process to get in, but it remains competitive once companies are admitted. Something that happens at the end of these days is we ask the companies to exit the room at the very end, and then the moderator of the room, in this picture it's actually Ajay Agarwal, our founder, is going to ask the marketplace of entrepreneurial judgment, all of these mentors and investors, who they want to see at the next session. And all it takes is one hand to go up to save a company. And despite the fact that this is a nonprofit program that doesn't take equity or charge fees, or pays these mentors and investors, the whole program is governed by market dynamics. Again, we were founded by an economist, so hence all the jargon. And so when someone raises their hand, it commits them to 4 hours of mentorship over the coming 8-week cycle. So just think about the session day. At the end of the day, the company walks away with 3 bespoke peer-reviewed objectives that they are going to sprint towards. And then if they are saved in the program, they are going to receive support as they pursue those objectives. So in a founder's words, I found, oh goodness, I'm drawing a blank on his name. His surname is Fernandez. I'm forgetting his first name. One of the co-founders of Darwin AI, a really interesting, explainable deep learning company. So basically, their platform allows you to understand why a neural network makes certain decisions. A founding team of 2 professors from the University of Waterloo working with 2, I believe they were both master's students at the time. They've since gone on to raise $3.9 million. Here's what, it's Sheldon Fernandez. Here's what Sheldon said about going through the CDL process as a part of a technical team. So he says, overwhelmed by the potential of our IP, we lacked focus, precision, and a concrete plan. 5 laser-focused sessions over 9 months in which our business plan was subjected to microscopic analysis from hardened entrepreneurs, less impressed with the coolness of our technology than by the business potentiality surrounding it. In those initial meetings, the questions came fast. Who are your customers? What pain point does the technology address? How much will people pay for the platform? How is the technology defensible? And most memorably, I wasn't in the room for this, but it still has gone down in CDL history. At the moment, this is a fancy science project. How do you transform it into a sustainable business? We now use that to describe most of the companies admitted at the beginning of the program. Fancy science projects, a portion of which will be financeable and investable by the end of the program. Sheldon goes on, though it seems obvious in hindsight, the correction of false steps, problematic assumptions, and naive expectations are necessary undertakings for any organization. CDL simply accelerated the journey for us in a relentless and exponential fashion. In sum, CDL was an 8-week forcing function in the early days that obliged us to crystallize our product offering and go-to-market strategy. Thereafter, it blossomed into an intensive blend of piercing critiques, fruitful networking, and invaluable mentorship. So that's really the core of the program. I'm just going to explain a few other secondary attributes. Not secondary as in less important. The point I'm trying to make is the real focus of the program is around objective setting and helping founders objective set with access to very senior entrepreneurs. But around that, we also have, I showed you some select business mentors. We also have scientists in the community. So on the business mentor side, there is about 250 across the network, senior entrepreneurs, angels, venture capitalists. On the scientist side, there's about 120. These are, in many cases, internationally renowned members of faculty. Sometimes they're from industry. People like Ruslan Salutnikov, the director of AI research at Apple, or Raquel Utresin, who leads the self-driving car program at Uber, or someone like Molly Shoiket, who is an international pioneer in tissue engineering. The scientists are there to complement the business mentors in the room. They're there to technically assess the companies and comment on the feasibility of the nascent science that these founders are trying to make commercially viable. Companies also get to work with MBA students. So we are based in business school, so we just launched CDL-Oxford, the first European location. The reason we want to do it, or the reason we do it this way, is because in addition to commercializing science, we also want to play our role in revolutionizing business pedagogy, complementing theory with experiential learning. So just like the companies being subjected to a rigorous application and interview process, we do the same thing with MBA students. The ones that get in are matched with companies, and it's a really elegant exchange. The company needs horsepower, and the MBA is looking for experience working with an early stage deep science startup. So what is our record? What have we accomplished since we were founded in 2012? Well, I think we're getting pretty good at it. We have admitted since 2012 a little over 875 companies. That equates to about a little over 1,500 founders. That's over 10,000 objectives, bespoke objectives that were formulated throughout the program for all of these companies. And that is translated to over £2.5 billion in equity value. That's how we measure the success, or our ability to commercialize science. A bit about the network. Myself and my colleagues are here from CDL-Oxford, the newest location. There are 5 in Canada. CDL sites operate streams. Streams are technology or industry-specific areas that companies fall into. So at Oxford, Toronto, and Montreal, the artificial intelligence stream is offered. Just for sake of time, I'm not going to go into all of these in detail, but we have one focused on energy, one focused on health, a really cool program focused on the intersection of quantum computing and machine learning. It was the first program, and as far as we know, it's still the only program in the world that's trying to nurture companies at the intersection of these 2 technologies. So some of our alumni, now you're going to hear from some of the alumni in the room when Kutlu comes up here and talks to them about their experience. Very quickly, Model AI is a really cool company. They are based in Boston. They were admitted to CDL Toronto in their AI stream in the most recent program cycle. A very cool company. They have these AI copies of archetypical users that can be deployed on digital products and used by clients to optimize design. 6 founders, 4 of them were professors, are still professors at Northeastern University, and 2 people with MSc degrees. And their CDL journey, they developed a product and operational strategy while in the CDL, and they closed a seed round with our investors. Leap Biosystems, very cool company as well, from Halifax, Canada. They were admitted to the Space Stream, the most recent one. So we just wrapped up 2018-19. We're about to go into 2019-20. Very cool company, medical technologies to support human health in remote areas terrestrially and for space exploration. So it's a mix of PhDs and doctors, 3 PhDs, 1 who's just wrapping up his PhD, and 3 medical doctors. And their CDL journey was very fruitful. They incorporated while they were in the program. They identified grant funding. They created an MVP. They established a corporate structure, and they signed 2 revenue-generating contracts shortly before the program wrapped up. Not as far along as Model AI, but that's because the CDL does have a slight range in the early stage companies that we admit. So by this point, usually there's a pretty high rate that we get the question, what's in it for CDL? How does this operate? What's the catch? How are you offering access to people like Patrick Pichette, the former CFO of Google, and not taking equity in companies? This is a philanthropic endeavor. We have philanthropists, governments, and corporations who have donated to the program because they believe in our mission, which is to enhance the prosperity of humankind through the rapid scaling of science-based startups. We say that CDL will inspire possibility, increase labor productivity, enhance job opportunities, thereby contributing to the overall welfare of humankind. And as I said, we also have this secondary goal of revolutionizing business pedagogy through the experiential learning we offer to MBAs. Now it's time to actually hear from people who've gone through the program firsthand. So I'm going to welcome or invite Kutlu up. Kutlu is my colleague from CDL-Oxford, and Tom, Alan, and James, who all participated in the CDL. Well, Alan and James, the most recent program cycle. Tom is from 2 cycles ago.
So please join me. Thank you guys for joining today, especially in a semi-challenging weather environment. So just before we begin, who here is working on a startup? And who here will be working on one in a year or 2? Okay, and who here would like to join one as a co-founder or first employee at a different risk-return profile? Okay, very good. And excellent. So I think we're here to talk about these different paths and different experiences. So thank you very much for joining us. So once again, my name is Kutlu. I've joined recently the CDL-Oxford program. And then I'm part of the venture management team, which we're looking for AI startups from across UK, Ireland, Nordics, but anyway, really, and then supporting them. So I think we're running a little bit late, so I'll try to do this quickly. But the UK Oxford program is new, but even before we launched, startups from all around the world, and UK included, were actually going to our programs in Canada. And I think we have a few, maybe less than 10 alumni from the UK. And actually, James is an exception. He's a Canadian UK company, but we'll get to that. So we were lucky to have actually quite a few of them come today to share their experience. So thank you again very much for coming. So I'll do very quick introductions, and then they'll talk about their experience, and then we'll see if we can have time for a question or 2, and then we'll break for networking, and then you can actually have some one-to-one conversations and do deep dives with the founders here. So Alan Mosca is with NPlan, and NPlan is actually using deep learning to predict construction projects, keeping on schedule, complexity, and risks. And he's the CTO of the company, and he actually started the company at an incubator called Entrepreneurship. And then, so they've been running for about 3 years now. They have customers all around the world, and then they joined the Canada CTS program, so he'll tell us about his experience. And James, and Alan actually has a PhD in computer science. He did some research work at the university, and then joined NPlan. And James is working on Valsys, which is using time series public data to predict the value of public companies. And then he's actually, he has a Canadian UK company, and then he joined the Canada AI program, and he'll tell us a little bit about his experience. He's a mathematician, has a master's in mathematics, and he's built a team of 3 to launch this business. Again, I think maybe 2 years old.
Yeah, that's about right.
Yeah. And then last, Tom Charman is co-founder of Nava, and then he's actually building something that you guys may be more likely to use than the other two, is actually an AI-driven city experience and exploration platform. And then he's probably closer to the team of building a team of hackers, hustlers, and hipsters. So he has 2 nice scientists and a designer, brought them together, and then launched the business, and has been running for about 3 years or so. And then so he'll give us that perspective of launching an early startup. Okay, so without further ado, let's start with our first question. And we can start maybe going in this order. Challenge of just starting at the MVP level, trying to also get something out that you can show, and then also trying to understand what customers expect. What were your top 1 or 2 challenges, and any pointers and advice you'd like to share?
Yeah, so the biggest question for us was, what are we going to build? Which is actually still sometimes coming up. The reason is we knew very well, and we still do know very well what the problem was, which is construction projects are late. I'm sure I'm not surprising anyone, and they go over budget. What we also knew very well is, what is our technical insight? Well, we can predict the outcome. We have the right data set. We figured out how to use that data set to predict what's going to happen. But that still didn't answer a question: what are we building and what are we selling? And so it all falls into, we sort of redefined a little bit product market fit into tech market fit, which we thought we had, and product market fit, which took us a long time to figure out. So that was one challenge. The second challenge, which is something that I find most early stage, I struggle to use the word entrepreneurs because I don't consider myself an entrepreneur. Most early stage founders struggle with is team. So underestimating hiring is one of the biggest mistakes that almost everyone does, which is a big time commitment to get it done right, and if you do it wrong, has a very high opportunity cost.
Wonderful. And are you hiring now?
Yes, we are hiring. We've got 5, 6 open positions. I can't remember all of them. Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, and James, what's your experience like?
So I think mine is working.
If it's light off is on.
Hello?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So I think my first challenge is quite similar to yours, in that we were in a position where we had this idea: we're going to apply machine learning to time series data to allow long-term asset managers to value companies in a more robust way, because what a lot of people don't know is that the models that tend to be used for long-term valuation of public companies aren't necessarily back-tested to see how accurately the forecasting is done, which is, of course, a very standard machine learning technique. And so in our minds, we said, well, let's bring some of that machine learning into the long-term value space. But we weren't sure exactly how to turn that into a product that people were going to pay for. And so we ended up having to speak to a lot of users. I think I must have spoken to 50, 60 investment bankers, equity research analysts, etc. One of them was on the banks of the River Thames in a half-hour coffee break, and getting people who are that busy to give you half an hour, 40 minutes of their time when there isn't really anything in it for them is incredibly difficult. And then on top of that, they also will give you conflicting advice. And I mean, this feeds into one of the reasons why we thought the CDL was such a great fit for us, was that you get a lot of this, what I once heard referred to really nicely as toxic noise. And it's your job as the entrepreneur to sort of navigate the choppy waters of the toxic noise to the island of what is ultimately a successful business. And so, yeah, that was probably our first challenge. Second challenge, which I suspect a lot of the AI startups in the room will also feel, is getting the data you need to actually make that first product. For us, it was obviously market data, fundamentals data, real-time trading data. It's really expensive. And so finding enough of that data so that we could generate an MVP that would ultimately allow us to raise the money, which meant we could pay for the data, which would allow us to do our product. So figuring out how to do that when you have no money, that was a significant challenge for us.
Great, wonderful. And Tom?
Yeah, I guess to echo on James's point there, I think the biggest thing for us actually was acquiring the data. Obviously, we work in the consumer space, so we work heavily with user data. And at day one, how do you get all of this user data? So we needed to build a basic MVP. It's actually what we did when we joined CDL. We had something very basic going. And we needed to kind of come to terms with how we're going to get data quickly. We actually ended up going down the route of building a synthetic data set, which we could use to then begin to model out user behavior. Obviously, the negative of that is we added bias into the model, which we've then since corrected. So I think that was the first big problem for us, is working out how we actually build this data set. And then, yeah, the second point for us is, and we learned this the hard way, is it comes back to kind of hiring again. We hired people too early. We went too quickly on the marketing because in the early stages of the company, we thought we need as many users as possible. We need as much data as possible. So let's turn the taps on. What that meant was very, very low ratings from users, because 9 times out of 10 the app crashed. And the other problem was actually you then ended up hiring people that you didn't need. And letting those people go is always more difficult than hiring them in the first case. So we learned that bit the hard way, but they're the kind of 2 pieces of advice I give, is find a way to build either a synthetic data set or get access to this data set, and don't scale too quickly, because if you do, it will bite you in the ass.
Okay, very good. So challenge of premature or going too fast as well as going too slow can be tricky. And this noise and signal challenge facing early stage startups is definitely something that's a big challenge. Okay, going on to the next phase. So Kyle described the CDL program quite well. It gives access to mentors on the business side, on the science side, and also can help with fundraising on the side as well. So what were you expecting when you joined CDL, and what did you get out of it? Who do you think it is especially useful for, especially early stage tech founders?
Yeah, so there's a couple of points in there that I think are very important. So just for context, when we joined CDL, we had just raised a seed round, so we weren't planning to fundraise at CDL, but we still joined. So despite the fact that there is an enormous marketplace for funding, that was not our reason for joining. In fact, our reason for joining was the mentorship, the experience. So effectively, the objectives. And a little bit the networking. The networking was actually very useful for us on the advisory side. Because of the Toronto CDL connections with the Vector Institute, with the University of Toronto, the connections with the University of Montreal, it was very good for us as a heavy ML company. So just for context, our team, out of 17 people, 14 are technical, of which about half have PhDs of some sort in machine learning or related fields. So we're very technically heavy. Having that sort of access was very good, both on the network side, and also we were eyeing up what does North America look like for us as a market. So being able to explore what are the needs of this completely different market from our client's point of view. Was very interesting, and having that guidance. So we actually developed a very good network in Toronto, where we have probably as many interested parties as we do in the UK now. And so for us, that was a great source of focus as well, right? Those objectives actually keep you on track. And so you actually sometimes get reminders of your objectives, what's an update, how are things going, as well as the 4 hours. We were fortunate enough that more than one person put their hand up every time, so we had a lot of feedback.
Great. James, how was your experience?
So as you mentioned, Kutlu, we're in a funny situation in that we are actually a Canadian company with a UK subsidiary, but you can probably tell from my accent that I didn't grow up in Canada. And the reason we went over to Toronto originally was for an incubator called Next AI, which the founder of CDL, Jay Agrawal, also co-founded. And it's more of an in-residency program, founder-focused. And when we came to the end of that program, we'd really benefited from people like Jay setting targets for us during that program. In fact, there was our first customer. Jay said to us at one of the sessions, "You need to now go and get a customer." And I think we kind of freaked out and went, "How on earth are we supposed to do that?" But because it'd been set for us as a goal, we said, "Well, we better go and do that then." And we did come back a month later and said, "Yeah, we've actually surprised ourselves and got a first customer." And so the CDL is that. In accelerator form, it's much more firm focused. It's trying to set those goals for you, which is what you really need. I mentioned the sort of toxic noise you can often get, and Kyle mentioned earlier the entrepreneurial judgment. That was something that I personally have found, and I think we as a founding team have found incredibly difficult to generate within ourselves completely organically. There's so much information about that out there about being a founder. There's loads of heuristics like move fast and break things. And if you're happy with your MVP, then you've released it too late. But really, every company is quite different, and those heuristics can be useful. But I found what we really needed was to speak to other people who'd been through this and could say, well, this is how we did it. And this is a problem that we had. We had a similar problem to you right now. Now, I'm not saying our solution is the solution you'd want to use, but here is a solution we used. And what is really nice about CDL is you have tons of people who've been in that position so that you can get a bunch of these different examples and try to map them onto the specific example of your business. And so that was what was incredibly powerful about the CDL program for us, and it was why we decided to join. We needed help setting those goals from people who could really assist us in that, and it worked incredibly well, I felt.
Yeah, great. Tom?
So firstly, I didn't expect anything of what I actually received when I joined CDL. I didn't really know what I was going in for. I knew that it was a very good accelerator program for AI startups. We were an early stage startup and we thought we could benefit from the advice. When we went out there, it was very, very brutal in the way that people just said what they thought. And that, for me, is the biggest thing that I got out of it. It was sitting down with some of the smartest people in the world that could say, this is crap, and this is how you fix it. And actually, you know, if it's done two things for me. One, it's definitely helped improve the business drastically, because now we can sit down and we can say, let's set these objectives, let's make sure we're hitting these targets. And this objective setting has only exacerbated itself once we've left CDL, joined another program, and continued to set these objectives that we're constantly hitting and checking the performance of the business. The other thing that it's done is I can now walk into any room, and no matter how much of an arsehole the guy or the girl is to me, I won't be fazed by it, because I've met people that are much more tough and will give me much better feedback, and I trust those people far more than anyone that that I could meet outside of CDL. So for me, it was community building, it was honest advice, and it was objective setting, and those three things combined is what made CDL so special to me.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, guys. So I think we don't have time to go into depth of how they build their products and businesses. So if you're interested in that, you can do that in the networking session. But we might take one or two questions about the general early stage challenges, experience, and advice. And we'll take one or two and then break into networking, please. Yeah.
Yeah, hi. Thanks very much for the introduction. So can I just ask each of you, were you already involved in the industries that you went into with your startups, and did that help or not, or was it completely the opposite?
Yeah, so absolutely not is the short answer. My previous experience is in quantitative finance. I then did my PhD whilst working full-time in quantitative finance. That was hard memories that still keep me awake. Yeah, absolutely not. My co-founder had experience of the problem. So he was, for several years, at Shell in construction management. So he was on the receiving end of construction projects going wrong. And we're talking things on very large scales, right? So we're talking about the scales of Crossrail, High Speed 2, I don't need to tell you that there's a lot of news about those. And that's where we started, and we literally had no idea. In fact, one of the things that we learned very early on is that ideas are worth nothing, and instead to try and build an actual insight. So the thing that you know that the rest of the world doesn't, or wouldn't believe is possible, or believable in some way. And that is what we figured out just by asking over and over and over to lots of different people. Like, what is causing this problem for you? Where is the breakdown? Where is the pain? Why is nobody solving that? And that's where we figured out what was the thing that we knew that nobody else did.
Any comments?
Yeah, so I was briefly in M&A, so I had experienced this problem to some degree, but it really was a brief stint. I hadn't got 2-3 years experience. I hadn't done thousands of valuation models. I just knew from my experience that it was an incredibly painful process that could be interesting, but there were these huge amounts of manual data extraction, poor forecasting that we'd seen in other models, etc. And it was something that was definitely a pain point I felt, but I wasn't certain, and this was something we really found out in all these user interviews, whether or not this was a cross-industry issue, or if maybe I just wasn't a very good analyst. And so that really helped, and I think that is the advice I would give to somebody who's kind of got a slight insight into a problem, but they maybe don't know how big a problem it is, how much somebody might be willing to pay to solve the problem, all of those things. You need to ask in a very similar manner. You need to ask as many people questions that nobody's asked them before, I think is another point. A lot of the thing that we found was people don't ask bankers, what makes your job hard? They don't tend to be very sympathetic towards them, and therefore, that's something that we did that realised that there was certainly a market for a product like this.
And then for us, the knowledge I had is the extent to which I started my first business when I was 16 in the retail space, and faced the problem from the retail side of the market, and then was actually living in Germany at the time, starting Nava as it is today, and experienced the consumer side of the business problem. So kind of I experienced both sides of the marketplace. I had recently sold a data analytics company that I founded, and at the time said I was never starting a company again, but got so fed up with not being able to do the things that I wanted to do while I was living in Germany that I then went on to and started. So no, I had absolutely no idea what I was doing when I started. I had a very small amount of insight in the sense that I think I knew what the retail problem was, and boy was I off. And the consumer problem is something that we stuck by, and to this day we still are trying to solve. So it was personal experience plus a bit of market testing, and I completely agree. Like, I needed to speak to, when we started the business, I was speaking to 20 to 30 people a week at least, consumer and retail side, to make sure that I wasn't just really bad at getting out and doing things, and that other people had the problem as well.
Just quickly, I didn't talk about the strike zone of what types of companies CDL focuses on. It's early stage companies with novel technology, and because of that, we tend to recruit a lot of PhD students, postdocs, and even faculty, even tenured faculty. So it's very common to see a company in the CDL where the founders, their only experience has been their academic journey. So, which I think is maybe what you were getting at.
Okay, let's take one last question before we break and then do one-on-ones, if there is one. Okay, so I think thank you to the Alan Turing Institute for hosting us, and thank you for coming. I think so. We have a chance. I think we're here until 6, so we can have some in-depth conversations with our founders or with us. So thank you for coming. Yeah.